All right, I think we are live. So welcome to everyone that has joined the Mapping the Mind conference today. Thanks for being with us this late in the day. This panel is going to be on social challenges in the psychedelic movement. And I think it might just be, not to toot our own horns too much, but it might just be one of the best panels of the day. So before I get into introducing all the wonderful people I have here with me today, we'll just say a bit about the conference itself. If you are just joining us now, Mapping the Mind is an annual psychedelic science conference that aims to raise funds and awareness in support of psychedelic research. This year, proceeds from Mapping the Mind 2020 are being donated to our friends at MAPS Canada and will help fund a study on psychedelic therapy for eating disorders. Eating disorders are among the most challenging mental disorders to treat. Furthermore, mortality rates for anorexia nervosa are the highest of any psychiatric disorder. Traditional treatments for eating disorders are relatively ineffective, and there is growing evidence that psychedelic therapy could be effective in treating. Dr. Adele LaFrance will look at the potential of MDMA assisted psychotherapy to treat anorexia nervosa and bulimia, and it will take place in 3 locations, 2 in Canada, Toronto and Vancouver, and 1 in the USA, being Denver. Conference goers are able to donate directly to support this study through Crowdcast using the donate button near the bottom of your screen. So the way we're going to frame this panel is I have 3 questions for our wonderful panelists. So we'll be going through those. Each panelist will have roughly 5 minutes to speak on each topic. And then at the end, we should have about 15 minutes for Q&A from the audience, because I know you'll have a bunch of great questions for all of our panelists. So without further delay, we'll jump right into who is here with me today. As for myself, my name is Ivy Zmuda. I am the Vice President of Regulatory Affairs for Tantalus Labs, a producer of cannabis in BC's Lower Mainland, and also obviously have a bit of an interest in psychedelics. My personal story, which I might touch on later in the panel as we go through some of these questions, are that I came out as transgender just a few months ago in March with the help of psychedelics throughout the year prior. So that's quite enough about me, so we'll get into our panelists. What I'm going to do is read a short bio for them, and then they'll have a few moments to tell us anything they want us to know about themselves. So firstly, we have Dr. NiCole Buchanan. She is a professor of psychology at Michigan State University and clinical director and founder of Alliance Psychological Associates, PLLC, in East Lansing, Michigan. She is a trainee in MAPS MDMA assisted psychotherapy training for communities of color and anticipates offering MDMA assisted psychotherapy when clinical trials are completed. Dr. Buchanan is a fellow of the Association for Psychological Science, 4 separate divisions of the American Psychological Association, and has received numerous national and international awards for her research, teaching, clinical work, and professional service. So I will toss it over to NiCole to tell us anything else she wants us to know about her.
Hello, everybody. I am incredibly excited to be here, and it's an honor to be here with this panel of just amazing, amazing people in the field. I guess one of the things that I think is important is I'm relatively new to this. So I come to this from a relatively academic stance, but also from a stance of being really outraged from what's happened politically with the trying to criminalize and take away these medications. And as somebody who focuses on trauma, I've been very committed to finding ways of making sure we can use these for healing within marginalized communities.
Wonderful, NiCole. Thanks so much for being here. So next, we will toss it to Bia, Dr. Bia. And Bia, with your last name, what's the correct pronunciation? So I don't mess it. Labate?
Yeah.
Perfect. All right, so we have Dr. Bia Labate with us. She has a PhD in social anthropology from the State University of Campinas, Unicamp, Brazil. She is executive director of the Chacruna Institute for Psychedelic Plant Medicines, and also a public education and culture specialist at the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, which we know as MAPS, and also adjunct faculty at the East-West Psychology Program at the California Institute of Integral Studies, CIIS. She is an author, co-author, and co-editor of 21 books, 2 special edition journals, and several peer-reviewed articles. So over to Bia.
Hello, everybody. Hello, Antonio. I learned that Antonio is from Spain, so he's an immigrant like me, and I thought that was nice to support his project. He's living in Canada and doing this amazing conference. So much love from San Francisco Bay Area. We're having some blue skies despite a lot of crazy fires. Today is a nice day. I feel a lot of gratitude for my fellow Californians that helped me migrate from the closet to being open and out and queer and proud. And I'm very, very happy to be in the center, the epicenter of the vibrant Bay Area where the psychedelic revolution is happening and taking over the whole world. Not to despise anybody's land, but here is really where we're really spearheading a lot of that. I want to talk about all these topics that are dear to my heart. Bruna, so happy to see Alex and NiCole here that are part of our team, and we're trying to create access, inclusion, diversity, equity, reciprocity. That's at the core of the Chacruna Institute for Psychedelic Plant Medicines. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Bia, and thanks for being here. So up next, we have Dr. Alexander Belser. Alex is a psychedelic researcher and licensed psychologist at Yale University. He is the founding president of Nautilus Sanctuary, the first nonprofit center for psychedelic medicine on the East Coast. He is also a member of Chacruna Institute's Women, Gender Diversity, and Sexual Minorities Working Group, where he works on issues impacting LGBTQI+ people. For the last 20 years, Alex has been active in the psychedelic research community and has authored over a dozen peer-reviewed journal articles and chapters. At Yale, Alex is investigating psilocybin treatments for OCD and depression, and also serves as a psychologist on the MAP-sponsored trials of MDMA-assisted psychotherapy. He is also the chief clinical officer of Delia, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right, Alex, Therapeutics, a drug discovery platform for the development of proprietary tryptamine-based therapeutics. And his research has been featured on the front page of the New York Times, in the Atlantic, the New Yorker, the Guardian, Vice, and in Michael Pollan's book, which I think a lot of us are big fans of, How to Change Your Mind. So over to you, Alex.
Well, some of us are big fans, but we also have some very good critiques to wage. I want to thank you, Ivy, for the intro. And I'm really excited that these accessibility, equitability, diversity, social challenges, as I think the title of this panel is happening, that these sorts of talks are happening on the roster at psychedelic conferences. As Bia and others know, they were not happening on the roster at psychedelic conferences as short a time ago as a few years ago in past psychedelic science conferences. And many of us waged and lobbied for a discourse on exactly these topics that I think you'll be asking us about, Ivy. And while those conversations were happening at the margins, they were not happening on center stage. And I'm really glad that Mapping the Mind has decided to include this sort of programming.
As am I, and I'm sure as are we all. Thanks so much, Alex. So, last but certainly not least is Dr. Will Su, MD. He has completed medical and graduate school at UCLA and the University of Oxford, respectively, before training as a psychiatrist at Harvard Medical School. He remained on the faculty at Harvard for 2 years prior to moving to New York City to further pursue his interest in psychedelic medicine as a practitioner and public advocate through speaking, writing, and social media. Dr. Su has been trained by MAPS to provide MDMA-assisted therapy and also maintains a private practice in sunny Los Angeles where he provides individual psychotherapy and ketamine-facilitated psychotherapy. So over to you, Will.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I guess the thing to add to that to me is just I'm very passionate about, educating everyone on how to best use psychedelics to do healing work. And as a medical doctor, I know that there's, I think there's an appearance that psychedelics are potentially only going to unfold or may mainly unfold within only the medicalized community. And, I think it's important, and I think that, that these are medicines that should be available to everybody. I do believe that non-medically trained people can also help heal themselves and help, heal their peer groups also. And so to me, I'm just really passionate about everyone having the education and access to these medicines.
Wonderful, thanks, Will. And just on a personal note, like that is my biggest concern now, is that working with these medicines will kind of be gatekept beyond the medical community. Not that there is anything wrong with that community, but that I really do think all walks of life should be able to contribute something if they have something to contribute. So very, very happy to hear you say that. So without further ado, we will jump right into our questions. So the way I will kind of run this is each panelist will have about 5 minutes to speak on the topic, and then I will throw it to the next panelist. We'll change up the order a little bit based on the questions, due to the fact that we have some wonderful people here with different areas of expertise. So question number 1, the trauma inflicted by racism across society has been pushed to the forefront of public consciousness by recent events. How can psychedelics help communities facing oppression? And I would like to toss this one first to NiCole.
Thank you. I suspected I might be able to talk about this for a few minutes. So one, I think we need to go back to the core principle around psychedelics is around radical healing. And these are communities that have been ravaged by historical trauma, contemporary trauma, the intergenerational trauma. And one of the powerful things with psychedelics is that it can help do some of that healing, even when you don't have access to the words and the direct memory of what has caused the suffering. And so being able to ensure that psychedelics are available, and I love the point that we made, and it cannot solely be that it's available through medicalized systems, because that is not one, there is a history, a long legacy of ways in which psychedelic studies, but also the medical community has used Black and brown bodies to do harm. So if we only allow this type of healing through these medicalized centers, that still means we're in essence saying these communities don't belong and they won't get the kind of healing that they so desperately deserve. So if part of the importance of psychedelics in healing these communities is that, one, it originated with these communities by and large, then was criminalized and taken away often from many of these communities. So there's a huge debt to be paid, and the amount of trauma that these communities have experienced, if we're going based on who has the largest needs, making sure those are met first, then these communities should be the first in line. But I don't think our current system is going to allow us to get there. I was part of MAP's first cohort of people of color being trained to be MDMA-assisted psychotherapists. So there are approximately 40 of us. And as far as I know, there has not been another cohort like it. And any given cohort has not been terribly diverse. And it makes a difference whether or not the person leading you on these kind of journeys shares your lived experiences, understands your history or not, whether it's from your ability to establish trust, but also the kinds of things that happen within a psychedelic assisted session, where Monica Williams and colleagues have an article that's coming out. In fact, it's been already available online with the Journal of Psychedelic Studies, where they talk about the experiences 3 Black women had going through a guided session through the MDMA assisted psychotherapy program. And in this session, they experienced microaggressions and the content that had this very nuanced component around race and gender intersecting was missed by the clinicians. And this to me is one of the things that is really problematic, but when we don't have enough people trained from within the community to offer these services to people of the community. So I think psychedelics, part of why I so believe in this is because I felt the radical healing power that they offer, and these communities deserve it, and they deserve to have it from people that understand the community and understand them and come from the community. I'm sure that's 5 minutes also.
No, right on, almost perfect. Thanks so much on that, NiCole. I am definitely there with you on what we're seeing focused on versus what we're not seeing focused on. So very, very happy you are in this fight with us. So next, I would like to give it to Will.
All right, thank you. I don't know. I guess what's coming to mind right now is how, I guess when you say the question, how can psychedelics help heal the communities facing oppression? I think I don't know, the terms trauma versus what is traumatic comes to mind. Trauma being the initial incident that if left uncatharsis, ends up leading to traumatic feelings later, even in the absence of the initial trauma. And so, when I think of my own healing or the healing of my clients, it's rarely done in the form of like directly with, if you want to use the word perpetrator, right, or as opposed to the victim. And so, yeah, I think one area is to really give more access, and provide training, as NiCole was saying, to all communities who are, interested in becoming healers, so that, more likely they're going to go back to their communities to do this work. I think then you have, perhaps then you need the support of the different organizations that are doing the training to allow and to recruit people and to support that, like MAPS and Hefter, etc. So those are the kind of the two, more easier things I think that come to mind for me. But then I actually, there some thoughts come to mind around, can you then have, say 2 groups, and right now when we say racism in the country, what comes to mind for me it's not just racism. Most of what's coming up right now is Black Americans and white Americans, right? We're not discussing or seeing much in the mainstream about Asian Americans or Chinese Americans. And this term people of color, I often, it doesn't resonate very strongly with me, because it puts in a bucket a large number of people who have not had a voice in the last few months, even during the BLM movement. And I know in particular Chinese Americans, I'm half Chinese, have felt very silenced during these last few months. So the reason I bring that up is that, I think that at some level, the communities themselves, I think it's important for them to hopefully gain interest and to, again, seek training to become therapists. I think there's another level of work to be able to bring the education and what these medicines are about to the communities themselves, and we have education to show that these are very, very helpful tools for healing, because I do think that there's nuances in how each of those communities will accept because of stigmas within their own cultures. Those are the different things that come to mind for me.
Wonderful, thank you all really great points. So next, I will toss it to Via and her dog as well. If your dog wants to mention anything, feel free.
I'm sorry, people. This is a coronavirus office. So yeah, thanks for that question. I think if we look historically and traditionally, Indigenous people have survived colonization a lot through using psychedelics and doing rituals. And traditionally, psychedelics have been at the center of many civilizations and at the core on how people organize society. So it's extremely related to socialization, to territory, to identity. to ethnicity alliances between different cultures, but also to war. In some, if you look at the colonization of the Americas, a lot of the resistance, a lot of the resilience has to do with local forms of organization and spirituality and ritual and community. And at the core of a lot of those is the use of psychedelics. And even, it's a large pharmacopoeia that doesn't include only psychedelics, but a series of plants. Perhaps tobacco is the most important plant medicine of the Americas that has received very little attention. But by praying and being in ceremony, indigenous people have managed to stay indigenous despite years and years of oppression, genocide, attack, and they continue to do so. And, they're generous enough to invite us in when we need our own healing. Despite being persecuted for centuries, these medicines from indigenous people are now with us, and we're having a chance to learn directly from the source. So I just wanted to say that traditionally, psychedelics are at the center of civilizations and at the center of social organization. So it has been extremely related to resistance. Then, we can bring in more to the contemporary America's field. I made a few notes. You tell me when to stop. Please control my time. So we should first start by asking people of color how it feels to be oppressed, not assume that we know. So start by asking and learning. And then I'm throwing a bit of random things that it's not very much my style to say therapy things because I am an anthropologist, but I'm trying to be more open. Psychedelics can help you grasp with your inherent worth, which is important for people that suffer trauma. Oppressed people in general don't have access to mental health services. Psychedelics can be a shortcut, can reduce the time, and can help people achieve healing. Psychedelics can open people for spirituality, which can offer existential comfort. Oppression is a form of embodied trauma and also carry intergenerational dimensions, which I learned with Dr. NiCole in this webinar that I posted on the chat. Psychedelics can help heal the trauma of racism. Also, psychedelics can open your mind to other paradigms, to other worlds, to other hopes, to other utopias, to other dreams. And I want to this is my attempt to make a triple quote. Please bear with me. It's by a journal that I published with Dr. Monica Williams, and this researcher Dubois says, an African American, he says that African Americans are apt to develop what he called a double consciousness. In his own words, it is a peculiar sensation, this double consciousness, this sense of always being looked at oneself through the eyes of others, of measuring one's souls by the tape of a world that looks on in an amused contempt and pity. Whenever feels this two-ness, in America, a Negro, two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings, two warring ideals in one dark body, whose dodged strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder. I don't know how to say that. So what I'm trying to say is that people that suffer racism are already kind of trained to have this resilience and this ability to get in and out and to look from the outside into their own identity and to kind of disidentify yourself, the images that have been projected into you. So maybe that, psychedelics can help foster more this ability to do a transit, escape and a back that allows revisiting all of this. But anyway, to conclude, I want to say this is really not about healing the individual only. And if we're just thinking on how we're healing our biographies, our own traumas, our childhood things, we're really missing the big picture. The big picture is really about healing the collective, and racism is a form of collective trauma. And psychedelics can really help us think about those issues.
Wonderful, Bia. Thanks so much. It's really great that you bring up childhood trauma, because I was at a conference, I was watching a conference yesterday where they talked about the fact that they perhaps think that the reason psilocybin has long-lasting impacts after treatment is because it can perhaps downregulate genes for inflammation. And that's just a theory right now, but what they have found proof for is that childhood trauma can actually lead to physical repercussions later in life, like heart disease, diabetes, all that kind of thing. So yeah, I am all in with you that psychedelics are a very, very cool way of perhaps doing some new treatment methods in the future. So Alex, the last person on this topic, I will throw it to you.
I want to ask the question of how psychedelics are misused in propagating structural racism in the United States and around the world. And one way is this pernicious, nuanced type of psychedelic exceptionalism. We in the United States live in a country that's the biggest jailer in the world and has been for my entire lifetime, and I'm turning 40 this year. We have more people per capita behind bars than any other nation, including China and Syria and other places that you think might have more, and more in total, over, I think, 7 million people under criminal justice supervision, vastly disproportionately Black, Indigenous, people of color, queer folks. The system, we know, largely stems from the war on drugs, which historically we have evidence from Nixon and down the line that it was an intentional war perpetrated to keep people of color in line, disempowered, along with radicals like hippies. And so many, I have a master's degree in criminology, and when you look at the studies on like who's arrested, what's involved, more than half of arrests involve some sort of either drug-related crime or a person who's intoxicated in some way. And so this massive, terrifying racial injustice experience, not just with ICE camps in the last few years, but in your local county jails and state facilities and Bureau of Prison facilities on the federal level, propagates systemic racism to a terrible extent. And then we have the psychedelic line of research with, largely white cisgender men in ties and coats going out for massive venture capital backed NASDAQ releases, making a lot of money on the potential therapeutic value of these medicines. But I think that, as Audre Lorde says, the master's tools cannot be, will never dismantle the master's house. I think I may have said that incorrectly. Using psychedelics through these highly medicalized models that perpetrates corporate ownership, that perpetuates a type of scientific reductivism that completely ignores the issue of race in the room and the litany of racial abuses, not just with MK Ultra, but in other complex ways, including the death of Elijah McClain in racist policing practices. This is a young Black man who's 23 years old who was diagnosed with excited delirium, which is a pseudoscience. It's not an actual diagnosis that the APA or the AMA have endorsed. He was given 500 milligrams of ketamine, which is a profoundly, in some ways, beautiful medicine that I think can be very healing for many people. At the behest, he was given this injection of ketamine at the behest of white police officers in Aurora, Colorado, and he subsequently died a few days later. This way in which paramedics are getting pressure from white police officers to inject a Black man with psychedelics at a dosage range that far exceeds any normal dosage protocol is an example of so many things that we would say were going wrong, but this is how the system works. And so the only thing that I'll say about that is that I've taken inspiration from learning from others and other people's examples. We recently released a professional statement on the death of Elijah McClain and the misuse of ketamine that has over 150 professional signatories. And a number of other associations have come out speaking against these racing police practices. And Aurora, Colorado, the county where this has been going on, where they're using ketamine all the time in paramedic stops for people who are agitated, they've decided to stop using ketamine for the time being. They've actually ceased that policy and have put it on hold and are now reviewing it. It's not the big fix that we need, but I think it's a sign that reform can be held at the margins, and that we can sit in the middle with a more radical, like complete dismantling approach to the American criminal justice system, which it really, I don't think, can be reformed in the way that it's currently established.
Wonderful, Alex. Yeah, those are all really great points, and like I don't think we should ever put anyone in the position of having that power over people who are in that big of a distress situation. I mean, I think what we've seen in Canada with the police handling wellness checks with some really bad consequences over the past 2 or 3 months really speak to what you just said. So on to question number 2. My own experience with psychedelics and gender identity raises an interesting question as to the potential for psychedelics research and therapy within the LGBTQI+ community. And briefly, that experience was not that psychedelics told me one day out of nowhere I was transgender, but reframed it and helped me to realize it's better to live as who you are versus who you're not, if I can put that into a soundbite. So how do our panelists see this area of research and practice unfolding? And given that is his area of expertise, I will toss this to Alex.
Oh wow! I get the front and back bookends. It feels a little hard. I'm in my own process of kind of coming out of. I've been out for 20 years as a queer man, and exploring my own gender in different ways. And I wonder of the 278 people in this chat right now, how they're sitting, and what your experiences are of your sexual identity, your gender experience, sitting here as you're looking at the screen, watching us, talk and think. But also in your psychedelic visionary experiences, of which I'm sure many of you have had. As a psychologist, as a therapist, I get to work with people who come into treatment with all sorts of embedded transphobic, homophobic experiences, both straight and queer, cisgender and non-binary, all manner of things. And it's amazing how psychedelic experiences, including MDMA, open and shift and disinter these internalized structures of self-hate, especially for queer folks, that were put there through years and messages of being inferior, shameful, and stigmatized. I can't tell you how many friends I have here in Brooklyn that I listen to their stories of going home and feeling really rejected profoundly from their families. And my dissertation research was about preventing suicide amongst gay and lesbian kids, adolescents, because so many of them were at huge rates for violence in their communities, in their homes, in their places of worship and schools. And then it's no wonder that they suffer profoundly higher rates of depression, anxiety, substance use, and other difficulties later in life. The psychedelic community does not get to wear the white hat here. In fact, the psychedelic community, from before I got to be involved, led largely by white cisgender straight men, including people like Timothy Leary, who said explicitly, LSD is a specific cure for homosexuality. He thought that we could use LSD. We still talk about him like the Pied Prophet of psychedelics, with a little bit of like, he went too far. This is a guy who said, in print, we can cure all these gay people of this terrible affliction, homosexuality, and we can do it using this magic new chemical. Same thing with Ram Dass, who published multiple case reports of treating Richard Alpert, his colleague at Harvard, treating sexual minority and gender minority people through conversion therapy, which has been outlawed in many states to convert gay queer people to become straight, to rid them of this affliction. Masters in Houston used peyote and what they said was that it led towards heterosexualization, a word so strange it's hard to even pronounce. The famous Hollywood Hospital in British Columbia treated many people, including many sexual minority people. Now, this is more than a few decades in the past, but even today, It is normative when a person walks into a room for them to have the expectation in psychedelic treatment that they will have a cisgender male therapist and a cisgender female therapist. This reprises gender essentialism in its worst and most pernicious form. The idea that you have to have a mommy and daddy in the room, that they have to be cisgender male and female, and that the man embodies some sort of stereotyped essentialized masculinity, and the woman embodies some sorts of stereotyped traditional ideals of femininity, and that you need those individuals in order to create a healing set and setting context. I would argue that this does injustice and pernicious harm to straight folks as well as sexual minority people, because we're not even aware, I think many people are not aware or have not had discourses, how that sort of stereotype sexual dyadism, that literal binary in the room, propagates a sort of internalized sense of homophobia and transphobia. And this is the standard practice today. It's only recently that we've even started to ask the question, what are your pronouns? What is your sexual identity? What is your gender identity? We started to put those questions into our research studies, but we still don't know if these treatments work as well or differently for queer folks as they do for heterosexual folks. So there's a lot to be said on this. I think that there's a lot of room for allyship amongst target groups, racial, ethnic minorities, indigenous folks, queer folks. There's a lot of racism in the queer communities that we need to work on and are working on, and it's something that I have been sitting with. So there's allyship opportunities here, and I think there's a long way for us to go.
Wonderful, Alex. Yeah, I am definitely on the same page with all of that, and like with trans people in particular, like I think the challenges that some of us go through to access medical care, even like basic medical care, number one HRT, can really put us in some of those boxes you've mentioned. And like we have it good here in Canada. I have it really, really good in BC and elsewhere in the world. I think we take what we have for granted here. So next, I will throw it to Dia.
It's an honor to speak after Alex. I think it was in 2010 that I saw him and an American woman hanging some little like sheets saying, gay-friendly meetup, psychedelic science. And I thought at the time, I looked at and I said, wow, Americans are so weird. What is this? Are they going to go and say, hi, I like LSD, I'm gay. Hi, I like masculine, and I'm bisexual. And I was really like ridiculing it. And I can say that 10 years later, I'm married to that woman. And we hosted that conference called Queering Psychedelics. So it was a bit ironic. I want to say that psychedelics didn't really heal my internal homophobia and my hatred and myself, diminishing. What really healed me was California. And that was migrating here. It was a true libertation for myself. And I finally decided to do what Americans call get out of the closet. And because I'm such a nerd and I like conferences, I decided to celebrate coming out by inventing a conference called Queering Psychedelics. I was still having a hard time to name my wife in the conference. And I was like, okay, it's enough, but you don't have to appear there. And it's been a long journey, and we've been together 10 years, and we put that at the center of our mission in queerness. So we hosted Queering Psychedelics. Alex was our star presenter. I have put there the call for action that he has presented. I really recommend, I think that's the Bible of everything that I pasted on the chat. And since we hosted that conference, we have seen a big impact. We have seen, we also have a queer session in our site, and we saw a lot of, I saw at least 5 queering circles, integration circles emerge, emerge articles all over in different press, popular media, people are writing about it. So it's really a work that we have to do, and it's in the making. And we're historical eyewitnesses of the need to do this. So we really need to keep on pushing to raise activism for greater representation of queer people in the field. And we need to also create the safe spaces that can, support people coming to terms. with their sexual and gender identity. It's up to us to keep on commenting. So Clancy, my wife, she has written about her PhDs about how gays and lesbians come to terms with their identity through drinking ayahuasca. And so we have to keep on doing research like that. And as Alex said, we have to keep on studying, documenting, and researching the dark history of psychedelics being used as conversion therapy tools, which is still pretty fresh and pretty unacknowledged. And I'm going to repeat a lot of things that he says, which is the importance to just collect data regarding gender and sexuality when we do research. I think this is even running behind from people of color, because people will try to assess for race, but hardly ever assess, data in your conferences, in your researches, in your institution for sexuality and gender. And so the other thing that we have to do that is ugly and it stinks is we really have to denounce homophobia in our field, and especially in ayahuasca circles. And so we also have a whole thing in Chacruna that we created some guidelines to raise awareness around sexual abuse, and this kind of things go together, like people that are doing abuse and are homophobic, and it's just all this legacy that we have from this patriarchal systems. I have gotten into a series of really bad conflicts, but I kind of freed myself by immigrating here. I don't care to lose some ties and to break some friendships, because I just become unacceptable for me. Homophobia, there's still groups in Brazil that claim to give ayahuasca to change people's sexual orientation. The União do Vegetal is the main Brazilian ayahuasca church. They have a statement published claiming that they heal sexual orientation and other imperfections. So we really have to keep on pushing that. And as Alex said, the male and female diet is some topic we have to work on. And also a lot from his own manifest, assess sexual orientation and gender identity in all psychedelic studies, run subgroup analysis to evaluate treatment response for sexual minority people, run meta-analysis across studies to aggregate data for LGBTQ populations, create new affirmative therapies by, with, and for LGBTQ people, research sex and sexuality. We just had another crowdcast event of Community Forum in Chacruna with a pioneer in the Deadhead, and he was telling us how originally the hippie movements and the Deadheads were also homophobic, and there's so much areas that we take for granted and we don't study. We just have to keep on investigating all of them and advancing awareness and research.
Wonderful. Thanks, Pia. I will toss it next to NiCole.
Yeah, I feel like so many wonderful things have already been said, and I completely agree with the pieces here. One of the things that, linking to where a lot of my work comes to, is this idea of thinking also about the intersecting identities and thinking about what is it that happens specifically to Black trans women, Black trans men, and the level of violence, the level of rejection and harm, and just really experiences that are hard to wrap your head around. And so being able to use these substances to help bring healing to whatever extent for these kinds of things is immense. But I'd also, taking a slightly different direction, I would love to see more done in how these bring healing to the perpetrators of homophobia, those individuals who, for some reason, are so committed to hate of another person who they don't even know. Part of me just fundamentally cannot understand where that comes from, but I feel like it must come from a space that is in so dire need of healing, potentially also laden with self-hate, but part of the power of psychedelics is that ability to feel love across difference, and to begin to see how others, no matter kind of how they're packaged, are very, very similar to you. And to have that love and compassion for others that you want to have for yourself. So being able to use these medicines for healing within our marginalized communities, but also turning it back on those who have dominant identities and put the expectation that you are going to use these also to bring yourself to a point where you're no longer acting as perpetrator.
Wonderful, NiCole. Yeah, like I think what we might not think about sometimes is the perpetrators, and as much as maybe on the scale of cosmic justice, their feelings shouldn't matter all that much. In the reality we live in, they do. And when you can turn enemy into a friend, I mean, you are only doing good. So.
Well, if I could say one other piece of that, when I say perpetrator, I think many of us think of the ones that perhaps are actively inflicting violence, but we need to also remember that our silence is perpetration, that are kind of not questioning the gender binary, making assumptions about who can be what is an act of perpetration. And when we begin to think about it in a more broad way, it really comes down to we're all responsible for the way our society has marginalized various groups. And so we all need to take responsibility in doing our own work to heal, as well as systemic level healing, because the individual isn't going to get us there.
Exactly.
We need to look at our institutions and our systems that allow this kind of perpetuation.
Exactly. Wonderful. Thank you. And now on this topic, I'll toss it to Will.
All right. Thank you. Yeah, really, I'm glad that NiCole mentioned the perpetrators. So actually, first I apologize because I was a little bit scatterbrained when I was answering the first question. So I think my response is going to address both, because I think in both questions we're talking about groups, whether it's a racial minority or gender sexuality that we're viewing as oppressed or victimized. Because there's a quote that comes to mind that I heard recently, which says that nobody has a monopoly on suffering. And one of the things that I think is very painful to watch is often, I think, when we feel very strongly, or when a group feels very strongly, there's a lot of an us versus them mentality. And I think, a concept that I've started to think about for my own personal life is that to do work, to evolve each of us individually, or to evolve a group, we have to have enough commonality and we have to have enough difference to do work, right? If we only have commonality, we're only preaching to the choir. If we only have difference, we're only fighting. And so in some of those situations, if we're just fighting, I think we just say we walk away. Like, I cannot make a difference here. But again, if we're just in our own circle and we're just agreeing on everything, that also doesn't do anything. And so, I think in many ways, another way to say it is that I think we are each victims and we are each perpetrators of different aspects. And I think that's what makes this so complex, right? All of us have some sort of, insecurity or victimhood around physical abuse or race or gender or age or nationality or accent. And so in some ways, I feel it can feel overwhelming saying, I've got to memorize and be aware of all of these different things so that I don't offend anybody. And I feel overwhelmed by this sometimes. And so, one of the things that I've been thinking about, and I work with some clients who are very wealthy or who are public figures, and sometimes I'm criticized for that. But I actually think it's really important that everybody receives the medicine, because if there are people who are in positions of power, there usually are people who are in those positions because they've sought power because of some, insecurity within them that made them seek that to begin with. And so I think if we are really, as a community of healers working with medicine, providing it to the community at large, I think that's when we can potentially see the most, evolution of the communities as a whole. So.
Wonderful, Will. Yeah, I really like what you bring up both now and in our pre-talk for the panel. I think we do have to kind of realize that to some people, this can be very overwhelming. And yeah, just wonderful that you brought that up. So that is question number 2 dealt with. We're actually not doing too bad on time, so we'll hop to question number 3 and then some questions from the audience. So number 3 is, many psychedelic preparations and practices began with Indigenous cultures. How should the psychedelics industry respect and acknowledge the originators of the movement? And I just want to mention very, very briefly, I actually had some challenges with the wording of this question, because I think it's important to kind of realize here that we don't have a lot of representation from those communities, perhaps on this panel, and that in regards to what we have previously talked about on this panel, that maybe that's where it starts, that we need to have those voices at the table when we talk about these things. And just some of the trends I've seen with what makes the news, what's popular with people with money, that there's almost like this movement to rebrand taking psychedelics as something that maybe Silicon Valley came up with in the past 5 years as like biohacking. And I think that's a neat concept to like explore, but I really get the feeling sometimes that we're trying that it's like that old joke that like Uber was like Silicon Valley reinventing taxis, or like the multitude of other things they've kind of tweaked and kind of fit into their model of disruption, when maybe it wasn't really disrupting all that much. But anyway, without further delay on that topic, I will toss it to Thea.
Yeah, thank you. Also thinking that sitting here in Ohlone territory, and there's so many angles, I feel a little like intimidated, because I think Canada has done a lot of work, and this Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and there's a lot of things that I feel kind of a Canadian Indigenous scholar expert should be more adequate to talk than me. So trying to run different lanes and do the best I can. Also have a few notes. I would start by saying, don't try to patent medicalized indigenous plant medicines such as ayahuasca or peyote without consultation to indigenous people. That we shouldn't take for granted that we should make these medicines, and we should talk to the people that are traditional stewards of these plant medicines. And of course, increase indigenous representation in the field, and this means including indigenous people in your nonprofits, in your companies, in your publications, in psychedelic conferences. In Chikuna, we also just published this document called Guidelines for Inclusion of Indigenous People in Psychedelic Science Conferences. And basically in Chikuna, we have been trying to give visibility, empower, platform indigenous people and people of color. In our writings and our conferences and our community forums, we say they are our stars. We sometimes have a token white man, to bring some audience, but our stars are really the people of color. And so this is about inverting a bit the balance that it currently exists in the field, and trying to rewrite the narratives of the historical narratives of psychedelic mainstream, to reinsert people of color, indigenous people in these narratives. And this is a work that we really want to do. We're currently having 2 series in Chikuna permanently. One is Wednesday, the other is Friday. One is about women and the other is about people of color. So every week we try to give visibility to a different woman that has a historical role, or a person of color that is unacknowledged. And we really need to elevate these voices. And something that may be a little obvious when we're talking about indigenous people, try to include indigenous people. This is an example, as I just said in this panel, it happens all the time. We really have to make our effort to try to include indigenous people when we're talking about indigenous people. And when we do collaborations with indigenous people, we have to think of models of real partnerships, which involve doing things slowly, listening again, and building trust, slowing down, really. In Tikuna, we also have this Racial and Equity Access Committee, and sometimes I get so frustrated because I feel it's going so slow. But I'm constantly told to, keep on working, and that's how you can build things that are solid. And so start by listening, and I think we need to figure out how to be good partners and allies in research by letting indigenous peoples and communities tell us what they need. So we have to ask what they need. And so it's important to always ask the question, when you want to collaborate with an Indigenous person, are you doing this to satisfy your need for representation and your white guilt? How does that feel for the Indigenous person? What is there for her, for him? How does that matter for that person? What can you help her? Ask what that person is doing, what that person needs. How can you support their efforts and avoid tokenism? So also NiCole wrote a fabulous paper for Chikrina, saying how we need to place people of color in positions of power. It's not just putting one person there, but putting this person in a place that she can have a voice, that she can be heard. Collect data about diversity in your organization and conferences. I'd say honor and celebrate Indigenous people. Make Indigenous friends. If you have friends, it's human, it's personal to you. You don't want somebody bullying your family or friends. So you have to make diverse friends. And that's how you start to walk the talk. Create awards, maybe, honoring Indigenous people. Create research projects that are collaborative, that are community-based. Go to the community, ask, what do you need? How can I help? Let's make a research that makes sense for you. Support Indigenous grassroots organizations directly run by Indigenous people, that have an Indigenous view, that is led by Indigenous people. And, we're seeing the emergence of these new psychedelic businesses. So as our work advances, we see people that listen and pay attention. I have been asked by a few companies that want to be reciprocal. How can they be reciprocal? And how can they give back? So if you want to create a masculine product and your company is interested in being reciprocal, how can you do that? We have to start to have these conversations and start to think of ways that this can happen. But the truth is, where the psychedelic movement is right now, we don't have those answers. We're very much in the beginning of that conversation. And also we have to remember that reciprocity is not just about giving money. It's not like donate, click, I've done that, doing this. It's about relationships. It's about creating long-standing, systematic relationships. And we are currently working on a project called the Amazonian Reciprocity Initiative. So we are trying to figure out that ourselves. And I hope to have more news in the future because it's under elaboration. And I just want to conclude by saying that it's important to understand and acknowledge it, that even if you work with synthetic substances like MDMA or LSD, and I have also a part-time job in MAPS, and Rick Doblin, my boss there, he likes to say a lot, if you use I'm so happy that LSD and MDMA have no Indigenous use, so we don't own anything. And that's such a short-sighted vision, because we're inherited to Indigenous people in so many regards. And this movement and this science is really hair of Indigenous knowledge and traditions and rituals. I have given a whole presentation about this. I'm happy to share also. And, you should really dedicate to study and learn the history of the field of psychedelics, and then you can learn these links. But also, don't assume that all Indigenous people use psychedelics. Some don't. And there's also might be a lot of resistance in Indigenous communities. I think in Canada, there's also this, sensitivity about drug addiction and Indigenous people. The truth is that some communities will be very resistant to that. So also don't try to be the savior bringing psychedelics to heal Indigenous people, because sometimes they might not want, or, maybe what is worse, you want to do everything right, but maybe the Indigenous people don't want to join your project. So you have to accept that as well. Sometimes maybe it's putting them on a bad position in their community, and it will create burdens for them. And so we must also respect Indigenous people wishes to maybe not collaborate with us.
Perfect, Thea. Thanks so much. All right, so we're actually doing really good for time. We have 5 minutes for each of the remaining panelists on this topic and 15 minutes for questions. So I will toss it to Will next, because during our pre-conversation, you had a really interesting take on this question. So I'm really pumped to hear what you have to say.
Thank you. Yeah, I've given this topic like a lot of thought because so I'm half Nicaraguan, and the reason I mention that Spanish was my first language. So the majority of or all of the ayahuasca experiences I have had have been in Latin America, essentially, except for let's just leave it at that. They've all been in Latin America, and so because of that, I've spent a lot of time talking to the healers. And one of the things that's come up to me is come up for me is like they've just told me about their community. In the Western community, we often refer to we almost like deify the healers, right? We call them maestros. They're wearing all white, and people are like, heal me, please heal me. And it was interesting talking to them and actually even spending time in some of the communities. I went to one location where I was like literally just in their community. And in their own community, they're not deified at all. There's like 10 healers, for every, group of 300 in a town. And I was like thinking, it's kind of like Yelp, where some people in the community would be like, don't go to that guy. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Go to that guy. Like he's great. And also like, there wasn't really such a thing of any of these healers being full-time healers. They were also like the plumber or the carpenter, or they had some other job. And so one of the things that I think about is like, sometimes again, it's this group of like, oh my God, they're a victim. Like we're doing something bad to them by not honoring them. And I just think that there needs to be a lot more nuance about how we think about them. And again, it's a complex group to just say they're indigenous. If I think, and another thing, the group of Peruvian healers that's seeding the majority of the ayahuasca retreats out there come from about 3 or 4 different families. It doesn't actually represent the multitude of the Shipibo that are out there. And even those 3 or 4 families practice relatively different between each other. And if I would imagine, if you would then compare how is ayahuasca used not only within the Peruvian Shipibo diversity, but compared to Colombia, Brazil, Ecuador, there's a massive difference. And another thing that I think about is how are these practices, how have they changed over time? If we think that they've been in those communities for at least hundreds, if not thousands of years, would 500 years ago, the way it was practiced, would the people from 1,000 years ago be like, what are they doing? They're not honoring us. They've changed it so much. So what I'm trying to honor is just that this is an evolution, and they themselves are also undergoing their own healing practices. Another thing that was like, it was hard for me because there's a part of going to a healer and feeling like this person has the power and wanting to have full trust in this person. And I think there's value to that, but there can also be harm. The first place I ever went in Peru, I left early. The person took literally stole my money. And, he had been sleeping with like 3 of the different women that were at the retreat, and this is someone who, again, everyone was like, maestro. But, had he been corrupted by money? Had he been corrupted by again, the power that was bestowed upon him, and for another, just like more of a funny story is that, I would be chit-chatting with some of the healers and they'd be talking about, oh yeah, so-and-so, like, yeah, they just got divorced or separated, they got cheated on by this person. And I don't know, there was something to connecting to the humanity within each of these healers that made them just like, I don't know, just other humans who were living in a different place with a different culture, but still struggled with the same things that we struggled with. So I guess I'm not saying how should, I'm not answering the question directly about like, how do we respect and acknowledge, but I at least want to add some of the nuance that I feel is important to just consider when thinking about this group as a whole.
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much. And like, I think what you brought up, like the reason it did pique my interest is because so often when we talk about questions like this, that we do view those groups as one monolithic, they must all think the same way. And I think it's really important to highlight what you just said, that, they aren't all the same and their communities do deal with similar issues to ours. And so it's probably best to think about those nuances when we're talking about policy and not just do one blanket policy and then think that we kind of solved the problem. But anyway, thank you very much for that. I'll toss it now to NiCole.
Thanks. I'm trying to make sure I don't use time repeating things that other people had already said. So I've kind of been thinking about which points to make. And one of the things I think is being, and this was said by Bia, but I wanted to reiterate, making an effort to honor, name, memorialize those elders that have been doing this work. I mentioned early that I was a newbie to this, and I was first introduced in 2017 to kind of this new world that had missed me somehow, by reading Stealing Fire and then How to Change Your Mind. And if you are introduced to psychedelics through that manner, then it really is about biohacking, and it is completely disengaged from this legacy that is not merely in the past, but continues to the present day. And when I realized how disconnected my introduction was from what really was psychedelics and psychedelic plants were about, it was a little horrifying to me. So we need to look at how they've been systematically erased and reinsert, and then put them as primary. Because even these medicines that we can cook up in a lab, that's not how things started, and we should not pretend that that legacy doesn't exist. We also, some of the things I haven't directly heard, forgive me if I missed it and people did say it, we need to advocate for the decriminalization of their original uses by the people that use it. So the idea that we would use a plant or kind of reformulate a drug based on a plant, but then that is still criminalized for use within the people that use it is criminal in and of itself. So there needs to be time, effort, and money ensuring that there is a decriminalization movement that includes these individuals and the plant medicines that they've been using. Of course, the idea of compensating these groups, but compensating in collaboration, the idea of a true reciprocity model, not a fake one. But, and then the other huge thing that I don't think I heard, we need to protect these sacred plants. You know, we need to have time, money, people on the ground, and agitation with legislation to ensure that the places where these plants originate are not decimated. You know, we are watching the Amazon disappear, and it's not okay that we can just make something like LSD in a lab and then we're fine with that. We need to ensure that the places where these plants have originated, where they continue to thrive, that we are putting the resources in to keep them protected.
Wonderful, NiCole. Thanks so much. And like what you said about the fact that we shouldn't criminalize what these plants are being used for right now by these cultures is like 3,000% on the money. I mean, not to put too fine a point on it, but one of the people who jumped from cannabis in Canada to psychedelics argued before our Senate that we shouldn't permit outdoor growing of cannabis because kids with chainsaw drones would find a way to take the cannabis away from these legal companies. And I think if a person now in psychedelics was that brazen about rent seeking back then, there's no reason to think something similar won't happen now. So I think that's something everyone should keep an eye on. But Alex will be the last. What are your comments on question 3, Alex?
NiCole, I didn't mean to leave the hall for 1 minute, but when you said protect sacred plants, I had to go get my protect and honor sacred plants t-shirt. Can you see that?
Yep.
This is a gift from Chacruna that I just received in the mail. Bia, I want to thank you and your team, and NiCole for your service there as well. I'll speak to just like my contemporary experience of a little bit of what's happening. On one hand, we have representations of Indigenous people in books like Michael Pollan's book, where people like Maria Sabina, I think, get short shrift and very little page time, and a number of storytelling centered on the experience of like relatively privileged white cisgender straight male researchers and advocates get told. I think we may have lost NiCole. I hope she comes back. One of the things that occurs to me is so that in one sense, like in some official narratives, they Indigenous voices are not amplified or spoken, and in another way, like they're systematically put at the margins. The other thing that I see, and maybe I'm curious if other people experience this, is like in my like progressive radical social media communities on Facebook and Instagram, we see all these representations of Indigenous people where there's just like some random photograph of an Indigenous person and some inspiring quote next to them. And so this happened recently for Maria Sabina, where there was this beautiful poem, which is sort of like, I'll just read a couple lines of it because I saw this and I saw that it had been liked 4,000 times. It had gone viral. There was a photograph of Maria Sabina, who's a Mazatec curandera who helped introduce the world to psilocybin mushrooms, which is a medicine that I get to work with. And in this poem, it sounded sort of nice, and I'll just read a couple lines. Sweeten yourself with lavender, rosemary, and chamomile. Hug yourself with a cocoa bean and a touch of cinnamon. Put love in tea instead of sugar, and take it looking at the stars. And so it goes on and on like this. And I was like, people really love this poem. And it had been shared many, many thousands of times. It is this viral post attributed to Maria Sabina. I cannot find, I wrote to the poster, I was like, are you sure this is Maria Sabina? Because it doesn't really sound like her other work. And I consulted with a number of friends. I'm not an expert on the writings of Maria Sabina, but I can find no evidence whatsoever. In fact, I think I found like an article thread where somebody had inappropriately attributed to her. And so this is like this new age claptrap poem where we're supposed to like look at the stars and dance in our own truth, and you are the medicine, attributed with an unauthorized photographic representation of this woman healer from Mexico. Her words attributed to her. Now, she was a really interesting and profound and powerful teacher in many ways. She has printed words that we have access to. There are people alive who worked and studied with her, including people like Stanley Krippner, right? So we know, like, we have these stories, and then this new left reprisal of the noble savage representation of Maria Sabina, where her name gets attributed to this claptrap, just seems like a gross injustice, in part because we don't actually get to look at what she actually said and wrote, that we know she actually, her actual teachings. And so it just broke my heart. And I wrote to the poster and I said, I think we should take this down. It doesn't make any sense. That there's nothing to be done about it because it just multiplies, right? And so I don't know what to do with that right now, except to sort of comment on it in this way. But I'm open to people's suggestions as to how we can stop these sorts of representations from being propagated again and again.
Really great comments, Alex. They were enough to bring my cat out of hiding. She usually needs to make at least one comment on each panel I do. But anyway, yeah, like I think in the era of social media, everyone's looking for that soundbite, for that meme that's going to catch and like will go viral. And yeah, like I think what you said about not respecting the nuances of those cultures is like 100% true. Okay, so I think we have unfortunately lost NiCole. I think Tapping the Mind folks are working on getting her back. But in the meantime, what I'm going to do for questions is I'm going to go through the Q&A list. We have the voting mechanism, so I'm just going to go top to bottom. And I'm going to toss them to one panelist in particular, just so we can get through as many as possible. But if any of the other panelists have a burning comment you want to make, feel free. So first question is from Jaron Stryker. Thank you very much. How can we make these medicines available to people living in poverty, like on a disability pension, who can't afford therapy? And I think I'll toss that to Alex.
Oh my goodness, it's such a hard question. One of the problems with the current, and I think Will probably can speak better to this as a psychiatrist, but one of the problems in conventional psychiatry is that the revenue models incentivize daily pills that you take over the course of a lifetime, where we give lots of, not maybe much money in any given month, but the total cost of treatment for people who have depression is very high. With psychedelics, a lot of that money is up front, right? It's very expensive treatment. And in fact, like the MDMA study that I get to be a therapist with that MAPS has done is, it's sort of like the Cadillac of treatments, right? You have like, you have over 45 hours of clinical work for every patient with 3 MDMA sessions. They get to spend the night. They work with 2 therapists, so you have to pay for 2 providers. It's over 80 hours. It's, the market value of such a treatment is something like somewhere between $10,000 and $20,000. So these are not inexpensive the way that we're currently setting them up. And so it makes the question of like we're ramming our heads into the brick wall of how screwed up the American healthcare system is because of multiple levels of reasons why it systematically denies good quality access to healthcare in the United States, and incentivizes like a revenue model that doesn't actually get at the roots of what is causing people's suffering. I will say I get to work a little bit with the medicine ketamine with Dr. Raquel Bennett and others, and we gave a talk about this at the Psychedelic Liberty Summit that Shakruna and Bia hosted. And so in that talk, we get to review some of our recommendations for the field. So, Bennett Zellner has been working on the pollinator model, which is like, how can we create psychedelic clinics in this legal status, in this framework, that are better at creating accessibility for people who can't afford to pay out of pocket. Because almost all of the MDMA and psilocybin stuff that's happening right now is it's like out of pocket, people who can afford to pay for the treatment. In New York, we started a nonprofit organization called Nautilus Sanctuary. This is a psychedelic clinic and center, and we're trying to grapple with the question of how can we make these medicines more accessible and do it in a way that maintains high integrity, high quality treatment, without, but keeping the costs low. One of the ways that we can do that is to obviously do group treatments, which from what I can tell may actually be more efficacious than individual treatments or treatments where you have one patient to a ratio of 2 providers. But is there a way to do that? And we don't even know if there's a way to do that where it's actually not less helpful, but be potentially more helpful to be in a group therapy format. Obviously, if we can work with medicines that aren't proprietary and owned by venture capitalists far from where the source of healing is happening, that keeps the cost down. If we can work with medicines that are widely available and inexpensive. So my heart aches when I think about this because there's not like one thing to do. There's like 1,000 reforms that need to happen, and I will say that like what needs to happen is like a massive structural economic overhaul of the systems of psychiatric healing, not just in the United States but around the world. And until we do that, we're going to be making little fixes at the margin that can help. Like a scholarship fund in a clinic is a way to help. Some people pay full fees, some people pay a lower fee. That's maybe a way to help. Obviously, getting insurance coverage is a way to help, but these are not actually deep systemic fixes to the problem of money and class when it comes to access to healing. So I'd be curious to hear what the other panelists have to say on this.
Can I share a couple things?
Yeah, go for it, Will.
Yeah, so this is something I've also given a lot of thought about. And it's interesting because I think at one level, what I see is often that we equate, if I don't have money, I can't heal, which I think it's also something I think that needs to be looked at with nuance. Because, if I think about my own personal healing, actually most of it has come low cost or pretty free. And I guess more directly answering your question, something that I've actually suggested to a lot of people, and I love Alex's comment on groups, is because when I think of what the fundamentals of psychedelic healing are, it's a tool that allows us to access either emotions or memories that have been traumatic, and hopefully then in a safe environment that trauma can be held in a group, right? It can be bared along with other people, and that usually leads to the catharsis that's the healing mechanism. And one thing that I think it's not used very much, I think, in an intentional manner, is microdosing. Like I've had this thought, say if you had a group of close of like 4 or 5 friends that you really trusted that were dedicated to doing healing with each other, and say you were to say every Sunday night, let's get together for 2 hours, we're gonna put our phones away, we're not gonna drink alcohol, no small talk, let's just connect about what's happening. And then once a month, you took something like 1/2 gram of mushrooms together. You know, that would, I think, could lead to an opening, a closeness within the friend group, catharsis, and it would come relatively free. You know, and I think that, you know, that's one thing that I've shared on multiple podcasts and stuff that I've talked. I've actually only had 2 people say that they're even thinking about following up on it. But this is, again, me pushing, because even if you were to be able to afford to have 2 trained therapists buy maps, do the whole, you know, whatever, 45, 60-hour study, that's no guarantee also that you're really going to connect with the healers, that they're going to be able to get, you know, the help you with the healing that you need. So this idea that the practical one that I want to keep pushing is this idea of intentional microdosing within, again, couples or small groups of people within your own community. And it can be done very gently. Again, you don't have to take an entire day off. It can be just something that slowly over time, you know, just is an add-on to whatever other forms of healing people are doing.
Great, wonderful. Since this question has actually got the most upvotes by a large margin, I would actually like to toss it to NiCole and or Bia if you have any comments on this question.
I was gone for a piece of this. Was
okay,
this
sure.
the question?
Yeah. So the question is, how can we make these medicines available to people living in poverty, like on a disability pension, who can't afford therapy? Got
it. And did you say me, correct? Okay, sorry on that confusion.
Yeah, no, not at all.
So hopefully this isn't a repeat of what's already been said, but with my clinic, part of what I ask all of the clinicians to do is to make sure that they are reserving part of their caseloads for people that need sliding scale and very low fee sessions. So figuring that for us is part of our commitment, and as a social justice focused clinic, that's one of the things that we try to do. I love the idea also of thinking the idea of sliding fee even for MDMA. Like I heard Alex talk about it, it's just such an intensive program that it would be very difficult to recoup even on a sliding fee scale. So one of the things I heard from Monica Williams that she had tried with her at her clinic and apparently was successful was asking people who were capable of paying to also foot the bill for another person who was not capable of paying. And when I heard this, especially hearing how much it costs, I was very pleasantly surprised to hear that people were jumping to do it. And part of what she said is, you know, we will ensure prioritizing if what you're doing is also compensating another person to be able to go through the project or through the program. And so, you know, the people that could afford it in the first place, many of them were more than happy and willing and able to pay for a second person to do it. And so that provided a segue for people to have the service who couldn't afford to do it at all, which was really amazing. So I think looking also into part of what I could do on my side is looking into things like grants from Open Society that can help pay for some people to go through the programs and to do other fundraising efforts to ensure that people can do this. And inherently what I'm saying is it's partially the responsibility of those who are benefiting from being able to offer these services to make sure that we can offer these services to people that would not normally be able to get to them. I also really like the idea of thinking about some of the program, like I'm doing some of the training with Polaris to be able to do ketamine assisted, something that's much more reasonably priced. The time commitment is much more reasonable. It's something that is much more approachable for a larger body of people, and making sure that that's part of the package of what we can offer individuals. I also think we should demand from the companies that start making lots of money from being able to create a monopoly around these things, that they have programs that allow people to access these kind of medicines who can't pay for them. I mean, this is actually quite common with drug companies of other types, making sure that that's part of the sustainability program with these companies as well.
Wonderful, NiCole. Thanks so much for those comments. And I just want to give a shout out to Amy in the chat, who has mentioned that the price for ketamine intranasally is ridiculous right now. And actually, I was at this conference last year. It brought up that after the patent was given in the U.S., that prices here in Canada would go up quite a bit. So like, I think we should frame this as not, this is some kind of theoretical danger that might happen, but that it is already happening.
I'll just say that the intranasal product is actually S-ketamine, which is a proprietary Janssen formulation, which is 100 times more expensive than good old generic ketamine, which is extremely cheap, like pennies on the dollar cheap. And there's no evidence whatsoever that the proprietary formulation, S-ketamine, is outperforms or is any way clinically better than good old generic cheap ketamine. So that's what we're looking at.
Yeah. And like that was, sorry, go ahead, Will.
No, I was going to say, I was having a conversation last night with a couple of doctors. And the other thing is that intranasal, I have had no success with intranasal ketamine, right? Usually all the 90+% of the evidence is IV-based generic ketamine. And so this, I think, is on doctors to educate themselves. I think doctors who are prescribing S-ketamine are really at fault because they're kind of just being lazy and looking at ads and then prescribing without actually looking at the data. So I think that's another big fault of the medical system.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm going to ask our Mapping the Mind friends if it's okay for you a couple minutes over. I know we're the last panel of the day, I think, as I try and get us through a couple more of these questions. But if they wouldn't mind responding in the chat as to whether we can go over 3 minutes from now, that'd be great. But one question, which I'm going to kind of rephrase as just general education to the general public regarding myths, because we have so much misinformation. Here in Vancouver, there's a recent push by certain, concerned citizen groups and media around harm reduction. Excellent, thank you, Antonio. And it's really heartbreaking to see when we fought for all this progress and like, it is being pushed back. And that's something that people caution me about in Canada. It's like, don't think because we passed this bill, the next government can't just rip it up. I mean, it's gotten so far now with cannabis that they can't. But I think we're still very much in that danger zone when it comes to things like harm reduction, psychedelics, et cetera. So the question is, in general, how can we help push that back? How can we educate the general public when there's so much misinformation out there? Maybe I will toss this to Dia to get started.
Thank you. And I just wanted to say that I am not such a fan of microdosing, not that I'm against it, but I don't know. I don't see that microdosing is the future of accessibility. Just wanted to mention that. The name of public education is something that we have in the title of our nonprofit. So we say promote public education around psychedelic plant medicines. And we define a lot of our mission to try to make academic knowledge more accessible. And I like to make this little joke that I published 21 books to come to the conclusion that nobody reads. And, it's better to publish a short article with a sexy title and a catchy, flashy image. And then, woo, everybody reads it. You go to a party and they're mentioning an idea to you and they say, I know what that person read that thing because they read it in your site. And so we are trying, I am kind of burned out of academia. I got really tired and I feel currently almost like working in academia is like having a gun pointing at me, stealing my life and my time away. So I kind of doing this para-academic move in my own career. And I think it's up to us to create this education. At the same time, when you migrate out of the world of academia, you're put in the harsh world of the internet. And that is a total jungle, which is very, very aggressive too. And at moments I feel nostalgic of the ivory tower of academia, where you had rigor, where people respected some kind of knowledge, some kind of priority, some kind of expertise. Because in the world of internet, everybody's an expert. And anybody went to a retreat 2 times and they are experts on that topic. There's a million meetups, salons, and groups, and everybody has an opinion about everything. So it's a challenge. I took a little course on SEO and how you have to create titles that are sexy and keywords and slug is the address of the internet. And then you have to write the first question, repeating the second and repeating the third. So then I get rebuked again. And I say, I don't want to write things that are around sexy keywords and, to make a splash that everybody will Google it and find it. And then you're writing for the Google algorithm robots and they're guiding your writing. So I think it's a real challenge. Like, people say, who's your audience? Who do you want to write to? And there's people that are currently completely educated to educating the masses and doing public education and writing to everybody. I am also not super seduced by that. I prefer to have some kind of more niche audience that is more expertise and that enjoys. And we're like trying to create, Chikrin is trying to be ahead of the curve and hear really awesome, amazing conversations that other people are not having. So I think it's really about a balance, not being totally academic, that hermetic, obscure, nobody reads, nobody understands, nobody buys, nobody have access. And on the other extreme, have this mishmash of, mainstreaming, SEO, slavery, that you're just trying to get your site in a Google rank, speed, and in the middle have something that is sexy, fun, but rigorous, excellence. So that is the challenge for me, and that's what I want to do. But there's space for a lot of things, we were doing a comparison between sites. The third wave is way on top, and then maps, and then everybody else. So it's a whole area. Public education, media, there's very little done about this. There's very little meta-reflection about what we're doing. There's this boom, but there's very little critique about what is the kind of media that we want to create. What is the kind of venue and platform? And then being a psychedelic journalism, a lot of people really shallow things out. I also feel upset about that, but reporting on the ground fast day to day demands that. So it's up to us as a movement to. Now there's also new venues that are just like the business people throwing blogs about psychedelics, publishing 1, 2, 3 articles per day, and then super mainstreaming sites totally vulgarizing and banalizing, psychedelics. So there's so much going on. I think people have to pay attention to what they're doing and why, and create things that are meaningful and not just the repetition of everything with everything.
Okay, awesome, Dia, great. So I'm just going to move through a bunch of the other questions here just to get through as many as we can. So a question that's kind of specific for Alex around how to get into study in Connecticut for psilocybin for depression, anxiety, and pain management. Maybe just in general, Alex, like how would you recommend people learn about local studies and like what's the best way for them to get access to them?
Yeah, I just want to say I think it's a trick question. And it makes me sad to say this, but the clinical trials that are happening, there are many, many happening more so than ever before. These clinical trials only happen because these are all Schedule I illegal drugs in the United States. Every single one of the drugs that we've talked about today, the medicine. So whether it's in Connecticut or California or NYU or Yale or wherever, the problem is you can certainly write to the coordinator. I think that psychedelic.support publishes a list of clinical trials. You can go on to clinicaltrials.gov and search for psychedelics and whatever condition you may be struggling with. But it's a trick question because these clinical trials are notoriously difficult to get into. They have a very long list of inclusion and exclusion criteria. And more often than not, although some people certainly get in because they do participate, more often than not, people are disappointed by the experience of trying to get into the trial. And I don't mean to dissuade people, but getting into a clinical trial is, for most people, most of the time, not a good plan to try to approach this. So we have to come up with other purposes. And I do a lot of harm reduction in my private practice where people are like, I can't get into any clinical trials. I tried. Like, are there underground people? Do I have to fly to Amsterdam? Do I have to fly to Peru or Brazil? Like, can I just do holotropic breath work? And these are the question. The answer is maybe. It depends on what your level of risk is. It depends on how you want to navigate these spaces. It goes right to the heart of our questions about access, right? Because we're living in a time of prohibition where people have to do crazy things that are oftentimes very expensive in order to access these types of healing.
Okay, awesome. One other question is regarding what sectors or groups are best for scientists wanting to enter the psychedelic domain. Any angle is welcome, including the activists, public knowledge, or concretely adding to the literature. So I think that question is really, how can other scientists who might not be in these fields necessarily gain access to them, or like what's the best way to get in? And actually, maybe Alex, I will toss that one to you as well.
How can who get in?
So what sectors or groups are best for scientists wanting to enter this field? So I think the question is, if you're not, in like a primary field related to it, like what other kind of groups in science would be good ones to kind of be in?
Well, I might defer to NiCole or to Bia in part, just because there's so many different fields that people can get into that could contribute to our learning and knowledge about psychedelic consciousness. And this calls back to like how we teach the public and students about this, right? So like our pedagogy, we look to the work of Paulo Freire, who working on the pedagogy of the oppressed. Our way that we talk about psychedelics is inflicted by racism, homophobia, classism, and colonialist thought. And so like trying to get psychedelics into the discourse, into the academy, into the medical profession, using the old structures of privilege, right? Like a bunch of white men who are rich, the listing on NASDAQ of Compass Pathways valued at $500 million yesterday. Like all of the trappings of wealth capitalism and privilege as a sort of like subversive front guard to like change the DEA licensing of psychedelic medicines is a specific strategy, which may have its merits, but it doesn't dismantle the way in which we talk about like the various ways that our practices and our teaching about psychedelics is inflected by colonialism, corporatism, racism. And so like that's something that we need to be really clear about. Like if we want to go that route and do that thing, that might be a legitimate way of reforming our society, but let's not pretend that it's something that it's not really.
Perfect. So perhaps the last one we'll be able to get to, because I think yours actually might have answered a couple, is for Will. The question is, I 100% agree that it should not just be MDs doing psychedelic assisted therapy. The question for Will is, do you think there's room for psychedelic medicine to at least be introduced in the basic medical curriculum? Should it be reserved for residency training? Any general thoughts?
There's a saying that I have that is that psychedelics are neither sufficient nor necessary for healing. And the reason I like to think of it that way is I think that they're, again, simply tools that allow us to access healing that's naturally within every single one of us. And so, I think that the greatest healers that I know, there's 5 people I think really that I fully trust being, guiding me through a session. And 3 of those have no professional degrees whatsoever. They've just done a tremendous amount of healing on their own. And so I know that's a little bit of a detraction from your question. So, but it's just something that's a really important concept that I think about. So yeah, but to quickly go to that, does this, should all of this be part of now normal psychiatric and medical resident training? Absolutely, and that's starting to happen. But at the same time, we don't have those educators out there. There aren't that many MDs out there that are prepped to train at the hundreds of medical schools across the country. So I think that's going to happen over time. The other thing that I think is very, it's not given as much attention also, is I think psychologists really, we want to train and have more education in psychology. I think A, that gets the cost lower. B, the fact that psychologists focus their training on therapy makes them much, much more apt to using these tools, because the vast majority of psychiatrists graduate, and even though the root of psychiatry was really through Freud, most psychiatrists, and I trained at like what people consider the best program in the country, we saw, like on average, I would say people saw 4 psychotherapy patients their entire training if they didn't take the extra step to do more. And so I really think what's necessary also is going to be collaboration between psychologists and psychiatrists, because there tends to not be very much overlap there.
Wonderful, great. So we are about 10 minutes over, which isn't too bad. So I think we got to most of the questions that were posed. Apologies to any that we didn't get to, but I would like to thank all of our guests here today, Alex, Will, Bia, and NiCole. And we'll give you maybe just a couple seconds to go through any closing thoughts, and we'll start with NiCole.
Thanks. One of my most important points I'd like to get out broadly is that psychedelics we're at this amazing point where we're starting to have greater acceptance in the larger community. People are at least willing to hear, which has not always been the case. And so many fields have been at the same crossroads and have chosen the path that was easiest, which was the path that did not actively incorporate inclusion, did not look at broad access, did not ensure that the relevant voices were at the table. I can use my own field of clinical science as an exemplar. In my writings, and why clinical psychology why clinical science must change or die, the core piece of it is it's making itself no longer relevant to the populace because it doesn't include the populace, it doesn't reflect the populace, it doesn't focus on the populace. And I think there's the academic side and the medical side of psychedelic science that is at risk of going down the same path. And so we are at that crossroads, and we can make a choice on how we choose to go forward. And hopefully we will choose that path that leads to greater inclusion, leads to greater access, and brings the other 97% of our society to the table to actively be part of this dialogue and benefit in the kind of radical healing that the psychedelic renaissance promises if we let it come.
Awesome, thanks so much, NiCole. Next to Will, some closing thoughts.
Yeah, thank you. So I want to say the reason that I really emphasize nuance is because to me, the most important piece is about doing our personal healing and then doing sort of our healing within our immediate community, our friends and the people who we have influence in. I tend to focus less on policy and the bigger picture things, because I think the bigger things like who's in office, etc., is in some ways like a gauge or a thermometer of where everyone else is as a community. So I think by focusing on ourselves and our immediate community, I think eventually we do have an impact on the greater populace. And in a way, it's the place that's most meaningful to us individually, because then we can have better relationships with those around us. And most importantly, a better relationship with ourselves.
Awesome, thanks so much, Will. Alex, up next for some closing thoughts.
Well, it's been lovely. I just want to say to everybody in the audience, it still is a weird artificial thing to be talking to 280 people and to not see any of you. It's like speaking into a black box, but I hope you're receiving what I've been trying to say and what I've been listening to my collaborators and colleagues here. I'll just say, Ivy, thanks for hosting and facilitating and mapping the mind, for putting this in the center of your conference and making your conference really accessible to people, and from a price point perspective, and really going out of your way to make discounted price tickets available, or even free tickets available to people who don't have the means. That's really powerful, and like that inflects with our psychedelic practice. And I just want to say, I think we're moving towards psychedelic villages. I really, and not like reprises of old villages. I don't even know what that means exactly, but I feel a call toward that. I'm hoping to help be a part of something like that. To live in relation with people, medicine, and expanded consciousness. and to do it in a way that is like deeply reflective of all of the inner architectures that we've inherited, that we've been told, that we continue to propagate, and to like stop propagating them and to start building new buds where we can, as best we can. So yeah, it's been lovely being here with all of you.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Alex. And last but certainly not least, Dia, with some closing thoughts.
Ok, yo envío un saludo afectuoso a Antonio. Gracias por tu apoyo y el programa. So, speaking Spanish, we are all one across the Americas, and we must not forget that we are part of a common humanity. And I just want to bring again the plants and the fungi, and you know, traditional people have treated plants and fungi and things of nature as people, as animated objects, as beings that have intelligence, that have knowledge, that have a personality, that have their idiosyncrasies. And if you take discipline, and if you listen, and if you pay attention, you can learn from these plants and these beings. And so we really need to cultivate not just better relationships between us as human beings on different gender and race and sexuality and geographies, but also as other species living here, cultivate this interspecies communication and honoring and, you know, taking the deep blessings from these plants that make us see, make us dream, make us wonder, make us have hope. And I just want to thank, you know, my path in this spiritual path with ayahuasca and plant medicines. Our nonprofit is named after ayahuasca. Chichuna is the leaf that makes ayahuasca. And we're here to serve. We're not here to lead. We're here to serve the plants and this cause and the traditional people that opened this path. And it's an honor to be in this movement. And I just want to say, if you're thinking whether you should get in or not, yes, do come. We need you. Please, we really need, especially the millennials, energetic, full of social justice passion. And, you know, also the conservative older folks with lots of money. We need all of you. We really need good people from all across the spectrum to join this movement, to make this renaissance, to create, you know, have something to believe in. And we are in the midst of a revolution. It's up to us. It's a great time with pandemic and all. So come join us, and to be continued. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Dia. I just want to give a shout out to Maps and some of our organizers, Desi, Antonio, and Roderick, and the audience. It's my first time moderating, and I think my big takeaway is to leave more time for questions next time. So sorry for those questions we couldn't get to, but